This is a Geek Leader. Hello and welcome to episode 178 of Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and this episode is brought to you by Private Internet Access. Now, if you don't use private internet access when you're surfing the web, let's say you're traveling or something like that, or you're out of your house, then you're probably not surfing the web securely. I've been using private internet access for over 3 years, and I love the service. I was at a security conference several years ago, back before COVID, and I connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, and immediately my endpoint protection started pinging me that I was having hacking attempts. Someone was trying to connect to, was scanning my ports and all this good stuff. So I launched private internet access, and once I did that, the threats just stopped. One of the cool things about private internet access is you can choose VPNs from different locations. So you can test whenever you make changes to see whether DNS is replicated. You can test what it looks like from different sites. You can test latency from different locations all around the world, all around the United States, and in many, many, many other countries. It's a very cool tool, and you can get your copy of, or your license or your account for private internet access for $3.33 a month. That's right, $3.33 a month by going to ageekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's ageekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got Michael Fillios. He's the founder and CEO of IT Alley, a nonprofit which is providing small and medium-sized businesses access to knowledge, research, and practical tools to improve their technical bottom line. And he's been a senior global business and technology executive with over 25 years of experience, and the author of a book that I've got in front of me called Tech Debt 2.0. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you don't mind, just to tell the audience a little bit about your background, your career, and kind of how you got to where you are today, to lay some context for our conversation today.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And it's not been the traditional path of a computer science graduate. In fact, I earned my degree in accounting and didn't realize after 30 years of being as a professional how important it was to understand finance, particularly as I became a CIO and a finance leader at global 500 companies. But the journey was certainly not by design. Some of it was through opportunities that I had as I experienced in the early stages of my career, which began at Ernst & Young on the audit side, where I got to get engaged with companies to understand essentially how they manage their financials. And got the fortunate opportunity for one of my clients who offered me a job, which was a small business, a $30 million business, but they were a subsidiary of a $350 million publicly traded company, where that's essentially where I got my teeth cut sort of on the IT side. I was brought in as an accounting manager. And then within about a year's time, I was given the accounting oversight, which included IT and HR. And unbeknownst to me at the time, also, our parent company wanted to look at upgrading their IT systems to a new ERP. So, John, this is back in the early 90s timeframe. So ERP, although was still prominent, the choices were certainly not ones that you have available today. But back in that era, it was a move towards mainframe to client server. Mm-hmm. So I got heavily involved and was asked to lead the first global ERP implementation as I was in my mid-20s. And I still take away a lot of those experiences and apply them to where I am today. I got so excited with that I decided to go on to do consulting and joined Grant Thornton and began to lead their ERP practice out of the Northeast, where I'm originally from. And that was an opportunity for me to expand beyond the pharmaceutical company that I was at into other industries. And once again, I truly enjoyed that. That was at a time when the accounting scandal started to hit, you may recall back in the day. And so Grant Thornton sold their accounting business, and I went on to a different opportunity at that time, which was a startup company that was just getting off the ground in the late 1990s. So basically around 2000, I joined a startup company and spent the next 10 years as an entrepreneur building a software and services company around business technology management. And a lot of that experience through my 30s at the time really helped to shape my opinions around IT management in general, seeing it from different perspectives, large and small, such that after those 10 years at that startup, I was recruited to be heading into my first corporate IT job with a company called ITT. And ITT, when I joined, was a $12 billion global multi-industrial company that, believe it or not, at the time had 165 ERP systems.
Mm.
Over the course of its 100 years of existence, it basically bought a lot of companies, and they never really integrated because that was their business model. So I was recruited by their then global CIO to help her develop a strategy to consolidate all of their ERPs into a single SAP instance, and got the board to approve a 7-year, $500 million investment to go ahead and do that. And was fortunate enough to be a part of that transformation. However, about a year and a half into it, the company decided to break itself apart, and I was asked to become the CIO of the legacy ITT Corporation. So after spending a year and a half trying to integrate the company, I was then involved with having to break it apart. So once again, tremendous amount of experience when you do a carve out versus trying to drive an integration. But we achieved our target. We spun the company off in about 9 months, and we achieved our goals. And that was the beginning of when I wanted to pursue CIO roles as my next step in my career. I was recruited from there to a small biotech in North Carolina, where I became their chief administrative officer. They do early phase drug trials. And then after that short stint, I went on to Delphi Automotive, where I became a chief information officer for their largest division. And that was an interesting experience. Although I was based in Michigan, they quickly asked me to head over to China and lead up IT from that part of the world. So I spent nearly 3 years for that division, managing, let's see, it was about 100 plants in 30 countries with a global role sitting on that part of the world. That clearly was a very interesting challenge, especially with technology, as we've all learned about China and the Great China Firewall and some of the intellectual property stuff.
Yeah.
After about 4 years at Delphi, I moved back to the States. Delphi relocated its headquarters overseas. Personally, I had a couple of kids that were going into high school, and after they endured all the moves that I mentioned, from Connecticut to North Carolina to Michigan to China back to Michigan, I needed to plant some roots. So I was recruited to join a bank here in Cincinnati called Fifth Third Bank, one of the top regional banks in the country, as their commercial bank CIO. And that gave me a different perspective on industry, as you can imagine, banking being very different than manufacturing. However, they were going through a digital transformation because of fintech and all the other technologies and just the changes in banking in general. So I jumped at the opportunity to move my family here to the Cincinnati area, got my kids into high school, and that next stage of my CIO career started. But it came to a quick end in about 14 months through organizational changes, which is typically what you see at a CIO level. Sometimes it stands for career is over. And I was on the short end of that stick, unfortunately, but it gave me the opportunity at that point in time, just recently turning 50, to think about what did I want to do in my, I guess, third act of my career, and decided to go back to my entrepreneurial roots. I launched a company called IT Ally, which subsequently then created the IT Ally Institute. And essentially, I focused my efforts since 2017 on serving small and mid-sized businesses, and taking all of that accumulated experience, John, and helping small businesses that don't always have the luxury, whether it be resources or talent or capabilities, to deal with some of the same technological challenges that I saw as a Fortune 500 leader. Cyber threats, digitization, moving to the cloud, business process, data analytics, you name it. And that's what we do basically here at IT Ally. We help small and mid-sized businesses either through our service offerings today, or we provide research and thought leadership through the Institute as a means to help educate the space and provide the C-suite with the much needed knowledge they need to not only survive, but thrive in this complex world. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context. As I said, not your traditional path, but it's certainly been an interesting journey for me, for sure.
Yeah, sounds like it. And I know, I hear a lot of parallels that I hear with other leaders when it comes to, technology being, underneath finance for a while. And what do you think the idea behind that is? Why is a lot of CTOs and CIOs reporting to CFOs?
Yeah, I mean, I've studied this, especially back in our days when I was at my startup company, because, and I'll share with you what that looks like in a small, mid-sized business in particular. The simple reason is the cost. I mean, as it relates to IT spend in any company, large or small, it's typically like the second largest spend you have behind people and labor and salaries. So naturally, it's a back office function, or at least predominantly viewed as a back office function. So why not put it under finance so that they can keep sort of a lever on the costs? That's historically been the way it's evolved. Now, I would say about a decade or so ago, there had started to be a sea change and a move out of the finance organization into being either direct report to the CEO, the business owner, or some other C-suite representative. And largely that had to do with the importance of IT becoming not just a necessary evil and to keep the lights on, investment, but something that can really transform and change the business and differentiate it. Small, mid-sized businesses, however, John, still, I would say about 75% of the IT leaders that we interact with report into finance. So they're lagging a little bit behind some of the Fortune 500 companies that have made that pivot.
Hmm.
We still see that changing some, and certainly the clients that we engage, it's something that we advocate for, depending on the IT leader, quite frankly. Not all IT leaders are built the same, and not all of them are comfortable with, nor do some of the small mid-sized businesses garner the need for a CIO type executive as well. So it really does depend on what they're trying to accomplish as a business, but it certainly has been a trend that I've seen. And I can tell you firsthand, being able to talk the language of finance has certainly helped me in my career, having to interact with boards and CFOs and explaining returns on investment and cash flows and other things that really do make an impact to the company's financials.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing that I've learned as well. I got my MBA before I really got into technology leadership, and that has helped me so much just to be able to use those terms, like you mentioned, talking about the ROI of the investment, and help me as a leader to make decisions of buy, build, because
Yep.
as a geek, I always want to code, I always want to build it myself, but a lot of times, it's a lot cheaper to buy than to build, and you got to be able to understand the business decisions that you make. Whenever those things come up.
It's a great point, and that's why you're seeing a lot more people go back and get that business degree, or however they wind up getting into IT. It's important to have that. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, it's a vital business function, and we all need to adapt to the way businesses are run. You pointed out something that's been really also in a phenomenon has been the movement to the cloud, because that's changed the cost profile from capital expenses to operating expenses, and just understanding that pivot, not only as a software company that maybe now is not getting those upfront 7-figure checks with maintenance behind it, are now paid on a subscription basis monthly. So we can look to all kinds of other markets and see how subscription models have evolved, whether it be Netflix or Amazon Prime. And people are more comfortable with that, especially CFOs. They like the steady state of a predictable number on a monthly basis versus the one-time hits that they have to plan for, and all of that. So I think the business models have also evolved along with the nature of how technology is being utilized and funded.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Adobe is one of the first ones to make that pivot, moving to the Creative Cloud suite, and then Microsoft not too far behind with Office 365. And
Yes.
it is a challenge to make that switch in your mindset from we just purchased Office 2000 back in the day, and then 2003, and now you're switching to 365 where it's a monthly hit. But the benefits that come along with that are quite significant if you really lay it out. Plus, it makes a lot of sense when you're going to meet with budgets and not have to every other year, every third year make that big ask for a CapEx expenditure. You can just say, hey, this is gonna be the recurring cost every month, every year, and it's not gonna have a huge impact every other year, every third year that we have to account for.
Yeah. No, it's probably a topic that we can go on and talk about at length, because it really is relevant, especially in COVID times when companies are trying to manage their budgets and get more agility and deal with this economic environment change. Be happy to chat with you about that one, just given my personal experiences as a finance and IT executive.
Well, since you brought up COVID, what are some of the things that we're seeing when it comes to, like, what can I expect as, let's say, the leader of a technical, side of a business? What can I expect to come out of COVID? I know right now, we've pivoted a lot. There's a lot of employees that used to be in the office that are now remote. We're looking at, increased laptop sales as well as a lot more cloud offerings. But what can I expect from the economy?
Well, listen, I think it's a big unknown. I mean, it's sort of a feast or famine situation, depending on what industry you're in. Fortunately, we've been able to work with a lot of clients that are considered essential businesses. So although their business may may have dropped some, or they've had to relook at their business. They're still able to keep their doors open, unlike the mom and pop stores and the restaurants and others that have really been, hard hit through this pandemic. But I would say, look, I mean, I know there's different people that have used this expression around "don't ever waste a good crisis," but in this case, it's like any business. Having been through a bankruptcy restructuring, I tell you, one of the best experiences I've ever had is having to go and make decisions that are being impacted on your survival day to day, where you can get micro focused on the things that matter. So I think for businesses at large, it's a great opportunity for them to take a fresh look and look at the impacts of COVID on their business. They may be accelerated because of COVID, but these are the things that they should be doing ordinarily. So
Mhm.
what we are seeing is, yeah, there's been maybe an accelerated adoption of technology as a result of this. Yeah, some of the technologies we're using here today, perhaps were purchased but weren't being used. And that also accelerated the adoption of these technologies to collaborate and remote work from home. Um, Clearly, cyber has been brought to the forefront once again, and hopefully, this is a calling card for many executives, not just IT people, but the executive C-suite, to really take heed of what's going on in the marketplace and begin to bolster their cyber readiness. And unfortunately, the statistics are really doom and gloom as it relates to small businesses that have to deal with any sort of ransomware or incident, have a difficult time responding and surviving those incidents because their lack of preparedness. You couple that with COVID, and that's really a recipe for disaster. So, on some hands, it's a good news, bad news stories for IT leaders in particular. And we developed actually a COVID-19 tech debt playbook because of the reasons that I mentioned. It's really an opportunity to go on offense as an IT leader, but also on defense. So you got to play both sides of the ball if you're a football fan,
Mhm.
especially this time of the year, getting excited about football again. But on offense, what does that mean? It means taking stock of the risks that you have in your organization. Don't, you can't go and protect your organization unless you understand the risks. So take time, do an assessment, and really understand your risks from a business impact perspective, right? Run it through that business lens and understand with your business stakeholders, engage with them on how they assess that risk.
Mhm.
It's a great opportunity for IT people to lean into it and change the dialogue. That's on an offensive side. On the flip side, I think again, as I mentioned, it's a good opportunity perhaps to put some processes in place, document some of your systems, do things that might help you with understanding your vendor management risk as well, and the third parties that are servicing you. Perhaps it's an opportunity to move to the cloud and not be a slow adopter anymore, and try to migrate there and get off some of your legacy systems, or deal with some of the tech debt, which we'll talk about here, that you might have incurred over the years. So I do think there's great opportunity for IT leaders right now. You've got to be willing to step into the fray. Don't run from it. Don't get paralyzed. Embrace it, and I think your company and yourself will benefit.
Yeah, and I was actually talking to an FBI agent not too long ago, and he was telling me that roughly 30%, they seem to roughly a 30% uptick of
Mhm.
ransomware since COVID has happened. Just because people have let their guards down a little bit, they've cut back on some staff, or maybe they've opened up the doors a little bit to allow more remote work, and
Makes
turned off
sense,
some of their
right?
two-factor authentication because they didn't have enough
Right.
tokens or whatever it was. And we've seen that going through the roof. So people need to really pay attention to that. I think that's a good point that you brought up. Um,
Hmm.
for anybody that's not familiar with the term technical debt, what is technical debt, and why did you happen to see a need for a 2.0 version?
That's a great question. I appreciate it, and of course, it's the foundation of the book. So when we were doing our research, we discovered that there's a term called technical debt, and technical debt's about 30 years old, believe it or not. And the term technical debt, although it was very prescient for its time, it was a very narrow definition where it really spoke to software defects and developers that were trying to get a sense of how much code defects were there, so they can make trade-off decisions on getting product to market faster while accepting some of the technical risk or debt that was in them, with the understanding that there'd be some backlog and they'd have to go back and remediate that. Well, you know, um, not always the case. So they might have rushed the product to market, but never really serviced the debt. So you would have accumulated technical debt in ways that would result back in that definition with the inability to maybe to serve customers, or perhaps a product that wasn't meeting demands, or maybe they had security implications because it wasn't architected properly. So just like technical debt, over the past 3 decades, as we just alluded to here, what has happened in technology? I mean, we've seen movement from mainframe to client server, to the internet, to the cloud, and all of that goes along with it today with machine learning and data analytics and the cybersecurity. So we felt there was a need to sort of modernize this version of technical debt in a traditional sense to what we call tech debt 2.0, and expand the definition, because what we've seen, tech debt doesn't just arise from software that's been built in house. It's now available in many forms. It can be made available in the form of business processes that are no longer automated or not automated at all. It could be in the form of data that's not being able to get leveraged for insights. It could be in the form of talent that perhaps has atrophied or hasn't kept up with all the current times. It can be hardware, as we've seen many cases, servers, PCs, and the like. So, and it could also be, John, which is counterintuitive, applications that are purchased, not only developed, right? So we see clients all the time purchase systems and don't keep up with those maintenance schedules. Next thing you know, they've got a 10-year-old system and they can't upgrade it. It's a basic reinstall or reimplementation. Therefore, you can't integrate, and they don't cooperate with other systems in an ecosystem. So we felt it was important to really look at this. And as technology has evolved, the definition of tech debt has evolved, and it's become more sinister. It's become more complex, and sometimes really hard to know when it exists. So that was the real motivation for us putting a 2.0 version on it.
Okay. And I know like my familiarity with tech debt always came from like the project management. When you're building software, you have some tech debt that you may have like a sprint or two where you go back and you try to address some of the tech debt that you let go so you could
Right.
hit that deadline, get that new feature out or whatever it was. And it was really intriguing to me when you talk about tech debt in the form of, talent, because, that's one thing that people are always want the top talent and the best talent. But then in technology, we always talk about, well, we want high retention rates too. We don't want to, go through having people, turn over every 6 months or 8 months or 18 months, whatever it is out in the field. So what do you mean by, technical debt when it comes to talent, and how as a technology leader can I kind of prevent this?
Sure. I mean, so it's just something that we're still learning more about, but I can tell you firsthand from experiences that we've had. And again, the context here is for small businesses, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't mean that I haven't seen this in Fortune 500s where everyone has a Bill, a Joe, a Jane that's been with the organization for 25 years, right? And they know everything about that environment. They're the ones that own it, operate it, developed it, so on and so forth, but haven't documented anything, right? So what we call in the business a key man risk is if you were looking at doing due diligence, let's say on buying a company, something that you evaluate is called key man risk. And key man doesn't just occur within IT, it occurs in any line of the business. So it could be the person on the shop floor, the manufacturing floor that's been there forever. Lord forbid that person's no longer there, they win the lottery. How do we recover, right? If that person's no longer there. So you put that in the context of technology, tech debt with individuals, we see this all time and time again. There's a lot of long timer people with the company that perhaps their skills are tied back to old technology platforms. The company has decided not to upgrade and move into modern technology, so they're still reliant on that individual. So that individual is a key man risk. The documentation isn't there because they just never get around to documenting stuff. So that's one example when it comes to talent. The other side of the talent wave is what you talked about in terms of retention, and as a leader of technology people, one of the top things that always became apparent to me was, although compensation was important, that wasn't usually number one when we surveyed our employees. It was about their personal development, right, and the projects that they worked on that could make an impact to the business. Those were usually one and two, and it could vacillate. Either one can vacillate in order of one or two. So it comes down to really in larger companies, when you've got teams and whatnot, is really understanding what those employees' motivations are. Are they trying to go down a path? We used to have a lot of discussions around people that would want to go down a technical path versus a management path. At some point in your career as an IT leader, you find that fork in the road and you've got to decide which path you want to go on. So do you want to continue to become a really savvy technologist, or do you want to go into supervising people, which gets you maybe a little further away from the technology, but you can sharpen some other skills if your path is to become an IT leader? I think it's just really fundamental HR management, knowing your people, knowing your skills, knowing what the company needs. And I can tell you this too, I would always fight for my teams to get training budgets annually approved. But the weird thing that would occur, let's just say I had a staff of 500 people and I got everybody $1,000 a year spent. When I'd ask those folks, during their periodic reviews or their managers about, hey, what are you doing this year for training? Many of them would say, I don't have time to go. Right. So here we are, get the money for you, and you're not using it. So there's also this, you got to make time to develop. You own your career. So there's a little bit of leadership style that comes into play here where it's never a good time to develop, right? You've got to make that time to do it, especially in tech. And if CFOs are listening, you certainly want to make sure you don't cut those budgets because you want those people to continue to sharpen their skills, especially in today's environment. But you can accumulate tech debt if you don't. And then you're going to wonder, hey, we don't have the right skill sets to meet the needs of this great new integration platform that's available. And we can't do it, or we don't have the right coders in place that know today's modern development methodologies, or we don't have anybody who understands Agile. You brought up Agile, or understands Scrum methodologies. We're still doing waterfall. I mean, those are all important things that you have to invest in and keep your talent as current as it needs to be to support your business objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've noticed that, like, as being a leader, I'll go out and get a whole bunch of budget money for training and, conferences that my people say they want to go to. And time will come. I'm like, hey, did you register for that conference? Well, we've got this project coming up. I really can't miss a week to go to this event. I can't, and it gets to the point where as a leader, you have to, put that into your schedule. You have to plan on the fact that these people have to take this training. You can't, it's not something you just kick down the road, because if you do that 1 or 2 years, you might be okay. But if you keep doing that, you're going to get to the point where now all of a sudden you've migrated to Office 365 and you don't have anybody that knows how to do the Office 365 administration suite because you didn't take any time to train on it. There's still,
That's right.
People that are familiar with Exchange 2000, or 2010 or whatever. They haven't moved up. And you run into that with software development as well. You didn't learn the new .NET framework that came out. You didn't switch from, Objective-C to Swift when, iOS development changed, and now you're left behind because you didn't take the time to say, hey, I'm going to give, 2 to 3 weeks every year. I'm going to take out of people's schedules and make them train. And I think that's one of the things we see today. And I see it over and over again.
You bet. You bet. And they've got to maintain relevancy in their skill set, right? Even if it does mean they're entering the marketplace, they may, again, it's there's no excuse for it.
Yeah. So let me ask you a hypothetical question. Let's say that I come into a company, maybe I'm hired as a new, IT director or CIO or CTO or something like that. And we've got, a core group of people who've been here for a long time. Maybe they're a manager of a certain group, or, maybe they're your senior network engineer, and they've been here for forever. They know all the knowledge. They're the go-to guy that everybody goes to. But again, like you said, all the knowledge is in their head because they're too valuable to spend time actually writing it down. How do you go about carving out some time or making it a priority for them, or helping them understand that it's important to actually share this knowledge and not become the technical debt that they are?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different tactics to take that I've used over the years, and certainly what you just described is something that we see every day working with our clients on the services end or on the research end of it. One way to do it for these kinds of projects that do have sort of a beginning and an end is you get some outside help, right? I mean, especially if it's documentation, right? You can probably get a junior level resource to come on in and sort of ride alongside and shadow this individual and just get the documentation done. So that could be in the sense that if you need to get it done quickly, this is a good example to kind of get some augmentation and just get it done, right? But then you've got a process in place to keep it current, right? Because this is the thing. It's not just doing it once, it's got to be part of an ongoing, process and management system. Alternatively, another option could be is sitting down with that individual and making it part of their performance review. right? So depending on the status of the company's payment bonus systems and compensation rules and whatnot, at the end of the day, if you make it so that there's a portion of that person's compensation at risk if they don't document their systems, I guarantee you they'll probably put a prioritization on it, or at least give it a good effort to try to get it done. And maybe there's some elements there where they have a sliding scale. If it's not 100% complete, at least it gets them something along the way. Those are two different tactics that you can take. At the end of the day, though, I think, John, it's really them understanding, because a lot of the folks that you characterize in that way look at it as job security. They think that if their documentation now is in place, that they're no longer needed. And the fact of the matter is, that's not true. There's still so much hands-on knowledge that they have together with that documentation that really makes them of value. So if they don't feel at risk, right, taking on the documentation, they're going to see as a good business practice, right? They're going to see as something that's just something that they have to do. And maybe there's other examples in the company that others are doing in other areas to document business processes, whatever those processes are. Maybe it's in preparation for an audit or some sort of compliance effort, so that they don't feel like they're getting singled out. But there's, depending on the situation, different tactics to apply on that. But not doing anything is irresponsible, and it puts your company at risk.
Yeah, and I think as a leader, you need to make sure those people feel safe. You have to let them know that their value is greater than what's in their head. It's also like what they do and how quickly they can respond. And having it documented is just an insurance policy in case they got something bigger and better. But also let them know that as part of their ability to grow, is they have to be able to kind of possibly have someone else fill this position so they can move up and move on to more strategic thinking.
That's true. I mean, writing yourself out of a job, it's usually the early advice you get as a leader is that you've got to be comfortable, right, in eliminating your position, right? And that's all in a development sense. So it just depends on how you look at it. So I do think there's different tactics there to take, and that's sort of a form of tech debt that we see is certainly, that can't be overlooked, is the talent side of the equation. It's with your vendors too. I mean, most IT organizations today depend on third parties heavily, and more heavily than ever before. So when we look at tech debt, we don't just look at it in the confines of your four walls of your organization. You have to start to look at it in terms of who your partners are. We get involved with a lot of companies that are migrating off of their current ERP onto new ERPs. Well, one of the things we're going to look at with that provider is, what's their technology roadmap? Where are they headed with their ERP platform? How many of them are moving towards the cloud? How many are staying on their legacy on-prem systems? What are they doing with respect to their database architecture to be more interoperable and integration platforms? So tech debt just is not only within your own company's boundaries, it bleeds into the partners that you work with. So that's another reason for us to make an expanded definition of it.
So when it comes to like tech debt, and thinking about it, how is it that me as an IT leader can maybe educate some folks in our leadership, like my CEO, about what is technical debt, and why it's important to spend some money on it up front or now, instead of letting it to accumulate later down the road?
Yeah, so it comes back to where we started the conversation, is you've got to find a language that the business is going to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And a four-letter word that comes to mind, not to take us in a different direction here, is risk.
Yeah.
So risk is the four-letter word that I like to use, particularly with business owners and family-owned businesses that are, again, are more susceptible. Perhaps this is their entire livelihood, right? They built a company. The last thing we want to see is these small businesses be jeopardized by some sort of risk. So it's articulating, though, that technical debt in a form of risk that the company is either willing to accept. And we talk about this too. Debt is not always a bad thing, right? There's intentional debt that we talk about. We're making a deliberate decision to incur that debt, right? It doesn't mean we're ignoring it, we're sweeping it under the rug. It just means that it's there and we're going to take care of it over time. So part of the conversation needs to be data driven. So I think these are not emotional conversations, which sometimes IT people get wrapped around at times, and they get very enamored with the technology or the provider. And, I think that's where business leaders sometimes see a weakness. and IT people when they get too excited about the tech. What they really need to do is to bring data, right? So one way to take this and address it head on is we've developed a diagnostic and a tech deck diagnostic that goes into about 54 different criteria that really help you understand, do you have potential root causes of tech debt in your organization? So bringing data, whether it's our diagnostic or your own assessment, I think is a healthy way to start that conversation. But it's not just the output of that, it's also putting it into business context.
Hmm.
So what does this mean for our business if we are not going to refresh our servers, or we don't have a solid backup and disaster recovery, or we don't have modern technology that integrates or can serve our customers' demanding needs that are changing every day? If COVID hasn't given us on a silver platter, you've got a great reason to bring it forward, but you got to do it non-emotionally. You've got to do it with some data, and you got to engage the business. This isn't an IT only decision. The last thing you want to see, John, is a company where IT makes a decision that the business doesn't understand that risk was taken, right? Because when you know what hits the fan, when the you know what hits the fan, who are they coming to? They're coming to IT.
Hmm.
So it's also not to say that it's a cover your ass thing, but it's bringing those conversations forward, letting everybody and being transparent about it, such that as a leadership team, especially if it's an IT leader who's got a seat at the table, you are all together making those trade-offs on risk. And that might mean we're going to defer that investment because we have 10 other things that are more important to it, which is quite okay. It's just knowing, making that decision intentionally is different than dealing with something that you're not managing and you want to ignore it, right? That's a more vulnerable position to be in.
So I know you work with a lot of companies. Have you seen like a high percentage of small and medium-sized companies that were kind of blindsided by COVID, that weren't ready for the mobilization and the things that happened? Or is it more like, they were prepared, they just, didn't know where it was going to come from?
So it's a great question, and you're hitting upon these things that we've actually done some research on. So at the ITLIinstitute.org site, you can see our thought leadership and research that we have ongoing. And right now, we're putting the finishing touches on a COVID study that asks some of these very questions in terms of the readiness and preparedness of businesses to deal with this. I also lead an IT roundtable here in the Cincinnati area with about 24 businesses, small, mid-sized business IT leaders. And our informal survey with them was when it all started to happen, some of them immediately went like to Best Buy or went to the local store and just started buying stuff, right? So they got a head start because, like you said, peripherals, laptops, whatever it was, sort of immediately went out of stock. So some of them were very much literally got into the car and bought whatever they can get out of the store and stocked up where they didn't have inventories. Some of the others, I think, were underestimating sort of the switch for remote workers to go home and what's going to be required to support them, especially as they're now just not casual users dialing into a VPN occasionally. Every day, they now need to work. So whether it mean how do you troubleshoot their issues at home, the bandwidth, the servicing, what technologies, the protocols around security, do we have the right policies in place? They certainly were not prepared for all of those things, and rightfully so. It just wasn't a use case that had been really comprehended, for that large scale percentage of work from home, which continue to occur today. So some of them had to really make up that ground quickly. The other side was the tooling. I mean, as we said, many of these companies may have bought, not to promote any one particular platform, but let's just say they had Teams, right? But it wasn't being used. They had licenses. It wasn't being used. Executives didn't. What's this team stuff? I don't even know what it is. Why am I going to bother wasting my time on it, right? Well, guess what? All of a sudden, COVID hits, and now you're being forced to kind of do this kind of stuff. So the training side was deficient, right? They just weren't ready to train people on it. So they had to develop plans to take care of that quickly. And of course, the adoption of those technologies started to increase rapidly as a result of it being the standard way of doing business now. So it was quite surprising. I really felt proud of at least some of the folks that I work with more intimately, that they maybe didn't have everything nailed down to the wall, but they pivoted quickly, they acted swiftly, they made decisions, and they got it done. And that's what IT people, people in IT get stuff done, right? They're go-to get it done. They may not always have the best management practices. They may not always have the best documentation, but when you are put to task, IT people inherently are like to get stuff done, and they'll do whatever they got to do, rip stuff off the wall. They'll do whatever they got to do to get it done. And that was what was needed in that moment.
Yeah, and I've seen the same thing with a lot of my colleagues and friends in technology. We all had to make a lot of quick decisions and change things on the fly. But it seems like most companies that I've talked to had no problem really pivoting and making it happen and getting it done much better than probably most people thought it would happen. And I'm super proud being in IT and having to go through an opportunity where you have to mobilize a couple hundred people who've never worked from home and getting them to work from home in a week's time and having everybody up and running and it all the business not shutting down for the most part.
And no question. And now you think about where we are in this conversation. Companies are rethinking whether workers need to report back to work because it's been so successful. We've proven that we can remote work anywhere, right? It's a work from anywhere, no longer work from home. It's work from anywhere, right? And this has been a technology theme that's been around. This is not new news, right? When mobility comes into play. So it's just accelerated it. And I think smart companies are using it as an example to kind of further accelerate and get an edge on the competition, double down, make the investments, get to the cloud faster, start looking at alternative ways of satisfying your customers, go more B2B and B2C. I mean, this is the other thing that's occurring. E-commerce has exploded. Companies that have been able to pivot, Walmart finally being able to pivot against Amazon is remarkable. And they're catching and closing some of that ground because of their e-commerce capabilities and been able to do that. Many companies have been able to survive by increasing sales online because their storefronts were closed. So technology, hopefully there's a lot of good lessons here and the case studies will be written that it was technology that helped accelerate digital transformation for many companies. And the pandemic really drove that.
Yeah, I think yep, I think it just accelerated what was already there and maybe brought to the forefront some things that were already there. Like I can take a simple example of one of the sandwich shops right up the road. They've had online ordering for years. Have I ever done it? No. You know why? Because it's really easy for me just to go there and pick up a sandwich, right? But when COVID hit, now it became an important thing to be able to order online and have it, curbside pickup and not have to go in and do the risk and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that they had the technology there, and thank God for that small business that they did have the technology there, because when this happened and they had to do it, they were ready.
That's right. And those are going to fall behind that aren't still catching up with the rest. It could be a potential threat to their business moving forward for sure.
So I really appreciate having you on, Michael, and talking about all this. How can people find out more about IT Ally and the things that you're doing, as well as pick up your book, Tech Debt 2.0?
Sure. So the simple way, if you go to the itallyinstitute.org, you'll find all the information there about our research, as well as where you can purchase the book, which is available on all online channels where books are sold, both in a soft copy as well as in our ebook downloadable version. You can also find me on LinkedIn, very active on social media, as well as Twitter. Twitter is MC Fillios, so you can look me up there by handle. And of course, if you're interested in any of the kinds of things that we do from a services perspective, you can look at itallyllc.com. And there we talk more about some of the services that we provide to our clients.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I'll link all that up in the show notes. So at geekleader.com, you can also find a link to Tech Debt 2.0 on our books from our guest. And thanks again, Michael. Have a great week.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. It was great talking with you.
Hope you guys enjoyed the interview, and don't forget about private internet access. You can get your VPN started today for $3.33 a month. Just visit geekleader.com/VPN. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating review in Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your shows. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you are listening on the Overcast player, click the little hearts and the stars. I'd greatly appreciate it. It helps us grow and get more listeners every day. Again, thanks so much, and have a great week.